Okay, good to go here, I hope. Thank you very much, Theo, for the introduction and the opportunity to speak here. Thank you for joining online. Thank you for joining on site. It's a bit of a daunting task to open the conference, I have to say, but I genuinely hope that, of course, I will tell the story from our perspective, but I really hope that there's also something to take away for you that you can apply in your own context if you face similar needs. Just want to take a brief moment to introduce so you know who you have in front of you. I'm Bert. I started out as an academic researcher, actually, cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, researching visual perception, researching experience as well, how our brains, this complicated organ, actually generating an experience. That was the first couple of years of my career. Okay, cool. So yeah, that was the first phase, and then I switched to EX naturally. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Really love to help product teams gather insights and drive the product forward, but also, I really get a kick still out of going beyond what people say, what people do, and really figure out what the unmet need is underlying to everything they say and do. Still really passionate about that. After 8 years. So what do I do when I'm not in the office or in the field? Well, pretty much literally, I'm in the fields. So I'm sitting on the gravel bike in Rheinhessen, really beautiful area. If you're ever around the area of Mainz, let me know. We can go for a ride. Vineyards, castles, hills. It's really beautiful up there. But of course, I can't spend all my days on the gravel bike. So what else is in the area? There's Boehringer Ingelheim. It's a pharmaceutical company. More than 50,000 people working there globally, and researching drugs, producing drugs, and so on. But not just doing that. Since a couple of years, there's also BIX, an innovation lab as part of the broader pharmaceutical company, and we de-risk early stage digital ideas in a patient-centric way. So let's unpack that a little bit. Digital, what is the benefits for a pharmaceutical company to go digital? Is there any benefit? That's our job to explore that. Early stage ideas and de-risking them. So it's our responsibility to generate new digital healthcare ideas and then go out to the target audience and look which idea works and which doesn't. So that means actually that figuring out that an idea is not a great idea is actually not failure. It's successfully identifying which ideas are worth investing in, which aren't. This also means that we're not really so much concerned with things like information architecture or the visual details of an interface. That's just not the stage yet. It becomes critical when we further develop the product, of course. But in the very initial stage, it's really more about, are we solving the right problem? Do we provide value with our idea? Much more than the nitty-gritty of the actual UI. And very importantly, we try to do that in a patient-centric way, of course. And I'm saying patient-centric, but actually it's a bit broader. User-centric, I would say, in the sense that our users could also be healthcare practitioners, doctors, but also internal researchers at the broader company, for example. New drug development and so on can benefit from digital products in the research pipeline, for example. Also there internally, we work with our researchers to get to solutions faster. So that's a little bit about BI and BIX. I will do the quick story even quicker. 6 years, around 100 people by now, both in Ingelheim here in Germany and Shanghai in China, but really working on initiatives all over the world. Just one example to make it a bit more concrete, Consana's Cloud is one platform that was released recently. It's a digital rehabilitation solution for stroke survivors in China. But actually similar than elsewhere in the world, of course, when you live very far from the bigger cities, it can be hard to get access to a proper rehabilitation program. And I think we all know how critical it is after stroke that you get very quickly to a rehabilitation. So to bring that closer to people who are not really having access to the larger healthcare systems in the city, Gonzalez Cloud was born, and it provides basically a remote measurement platform for range of motion, for example, after stroke. So you can really do an exercise and the tool will help you measuring, assessing what the current range of motion is. And that algorithm also helps you to come up with a treatment plan. And then there's kind of a daily exercise supervision, so people can film their own exercises, and you get kind of, as a healthcare professional, as a physiotherapist, you get an assessment of what's the quality of the exercises. And I'm sure if I went into physiotherapy, I could benefit from a notification popping up in the evening saying, hey, it's 7 p.m. you still haven't done your exercises yet. So that's just one example, Gonzalez Cloud. Just a few more things I think that would be useful to know about our context in order to contextualize a bit better why we came up with something like research operations. This is our innovation process. The details are really not that important, but what you need to know is that we have sort of an innovation funnel going from discovery to MVP to pilots, and then ideas are scaled up, and that's then when we get more into the details of the interface and so on. Very short discovery times, 1 month, short MVP times still. So what's important is that each of those phases come with certain evidence requirements. So every time we end the discovery, the idea is that we provide certain evidence for the desirability and the viability or the feasibility of the new idea. And it's really nice in that sense that research is built into the system that way. So we really need to work evidence-driven in order to secure more funding for a specific idea, basically. Second of all, we use the OKR framework, so objectives, key results. The main one for this year is that we become masters of experimentation. It's pretty unique, I think. I've never before worked in an organization as UXer where UX research and evidence-driven work is so ingrained to the core of what the company is doing. We have a couple of metrics, finished 10 of those pilot phases that you saw on the previous slide, finished 20 of discovery phases every quarter. So pretty ambitious targets that we kind of go through each of those quarters. And then third, here's our team of UX researchers and designers, about 10 designers, 3 researchers. And I want to mention that I'm bringing the story here today, but all of the things that you see later on is really developed with all those designers, but specifically, of course, with the 3 researchers. Also, Stephanie is here today, so I would really encourage you to, of course, afterwards talk to me, but also talk to her, because everything that you will see has been built together with Stephanie, with Guillermo as well. So I'm just bringing the story as well. So that brings me back to the initial slide, scaling patient centricity and digital healthcare innovation with research operations. So I think if you look back at what I just showed, 20 discoveries, 3 pilots in short amount of time, bring evidence, 3 UX researchers, I think it's pretty obvious that it just can't be done only with involvement of UX research. It just can't be done. So we needed to come up with some ideas on how to scale, how to open up as UX chapter. And one of the ways how we approached it was research operations. So how did we go about it? Maybe just a quick definition, and it's a standard, Nielsen-Norman definition. Research operations is the orchestration, optimization of people, processes, and crafts in order to amplify the value and impact of research at scale. Just a definition, so we're on the same page. It's really about scaling research, UX research beyond the UX researchers and designers in the company. I'm going to talk through a couple of initiatives that we launched within that research operations. It's going to be the perspective of our story, of course, but I really think that research operations can be useful in many different contexts. And I saw a couple of them in the past as well when I still worked as a consultant. I've seen environments where, user testing, usability testing was pretty common, but people were very eager to go more early stage, go based on the unmet needs and start generating new ideas. And then the question is, of course, how can we do that quickly, right? Generally, there won't be a lot of resources available for that. How can you set that up in a scaled way? Another example is that very often, I think meeting the user, getting insights about the user is a little bit confined to either UX designers or UX researchers, and it doesn't always really spread out to the broader teams. And then the question becomes, how can product owners, how can Scrum Masters, and so on, front-end developers, back-end developers, how can they also get a little bit of a feeling of who they're working for? And generally, I see that with developers, for example, they're also pretty eager to know who they're building the tool for, actually. So it's not just exclusive to UX people that they're interested in the target audience. So how can we improve that? How can we have more people in the company have access to the target audience and get in touch really with the people they're doing it for? And then last but not least, another example, doing things over and over, I think, is something that's familiar as a UX researcher and designer. Always writing scripts or discussion guides for research, organizing the similar things like recruitment and so on. Now, how can you make sure that you scale that a little bit, that you don't spend always the same time on these kind of logistics of research, and that you can maximize your time on actually doing the research, get in touch, better understand your user, right? Also, their research operations, I think, can give an answer. So first initiative that we launched, a bit philosophical, but installing democratization as a principle. It's a bit of a debate. I don't know, many of you probably are aware that this debate is going on still. How far should democratization go, right? Is it now all of a sudden that everybody is a UX researcher? Or is it really the case that only UX researchers can do research and we kind of have to fence off that expertise? And maybe before I go into how we looked at it, maybe it would be interesting to do a quick poll. And I don't know, Theo, if you can do the same poll online. But I don't know about you. Would you rather lean on the everybody is a UX researcher and we have to open up completely? Who would be voting for that? Let's do a quick poll. Okay, so that's a minority. What about the other side? Who is leaning more towards we should open up as UX research and have more people do this type of activity? Okay, more in that direction. Stop sharing. All right. So, okay, a bit of mix. That's interesting to see, but more people leaning towards opening that up. Yeah, I think we looked at it pretty similarly, more in that direction, I think. And what we've, the way how we started to think about it was more in terms of rigor, what needs more rigor and what needs less. And it's actually inspired by some conversations that I had on a previous conference. So it only speaks for events like these. As Theo suggested earlier, it's really meaningful to interact, I think, and get inspiration from each other. So the question we asked ourselves was, in that whole process, in everything that we do, what requires more rigor and what requires a bit less rigor? And this is how we looked at it. In the MVP and the pilot phase, we still want fully staffed people, right? It's longer term investments, multiple developers are involved. We can really afford putting also a UX profile there to go longer term and really dig deep and make sure that we get to markets in a proper way. But in discovery, the ambition is more aggressive, I would say, 20 discoveries per quarter. Also, the philosophy is really more that as a lab, we experiment early on, and that multiple roles, multiple profiles can just get their hands dirty and play around with new ideas. And that's why we went with discovery as the kind of everybody is a UX researcher kind of philosophy. So if we look at that earlier slide of the process, this is where we are. This is what we kind of opened up for in terms of democratization. So what does this change? A talent engineer, and he is real, by the way. He says hi. Jared is a member of our team. He's really a talent engineer, and he's working on an idea, let's say, picks it up and wants to explore it with some colleagues. What's next? Well, they need to talk to patients or healthcare practitioners, need to validate pain points, look for unmet needs, and so on. Maybe test a very first simple artifact, a prototype or something like that that visualizes, captures the idea. But there's a million things to think about, right? How do I organize all of this? How do I get to patients? What's the regulatory framework around that? How I'm going to use the data? Who analyzes it? How do we share it? There's a million things to think about. How does he go about this? Well, so instead of contacting this bunch of rock stars, what actually is going to happen is they're going to get in touch with UX researchers and designers, but we are really going to support them doing the experimentation, doing the research. So we are supporting people who do research, if you like the term. I want to share a couple of challenges as well, and maybe some questions as well. One challenge that we faced, and I'm saying that we faced or are facing because this bread is really just out of the oven. We're launching this as we speak. So we're in the midst of learnings, of getting more experience in this. So this is definitely not a story that's fully written. You need to communicate this with care because everybody has different sensitivities and not everybody is really up to getting in touch with the user, having that one-to-one contact with a patient. It's really not for every personality. And of course, we need to respect that. It's not that now everybody literally will do this type of thing. There's a lot of tasks to do in experimentation and research methods to set it up. So not necessarily everybody has to do it, but you need to put a lot of care, I think, in respecting the different views, and introducing this type of novelty takes time. And also want to put out a little bit of a question that I hope we can discuss in the Q&A. I already want to open it now, but suppose that you have challenging needs, you have targets or something, you need to do this and that, and not sufficient capacity to do it. It's really interesting, I think, to reflect, for example, in UX design or UX research, what is it in your specific context that you could democratize? And this is going to be different in every context, different for every type of domain, but it's a question you can, in essence, ask for every domain, I think. So if you really want to support all these people picking up research tasks, we need to provide a lot of support. That's obvious. How do we do that? We created kind of a step-by-step research guide. I'm not going to go through all the steps in the kind of approach, but just to highlight a little bit how we look at it. Some of the tasks will be done by the team, the product team itself, and we don't really intervene. We make them independent in this way. And then there's also some tasks that we will do together to support, but also occasionally to have some checks whether everything is going in the right direction. So research operations is not just about scaling in the sense that just do more work. It's also about kind of the trade-off between how do we do more work, but also keep some kind of a quality level in there. How do we ensure that things are properly done when we kind of open up and increase that? And then there are a couple of trainings here and there. I will still talk about those a bit more later on. So what the team can do, and actually start out with things like a business model canvas, where they think and reflect and map out several aspects of their business model, their idea, and the value proposition canvas. And they create kind of a research plan based on that. Which kind of studies would I like to run? How I'm going to approach it? Who is the target audience? And so on. And then we come together. Then we have kind of a check-in meeting where we look at what are the compliance aspects. There I said it, the C word in healthcare research. There are a couple of things we need to ensure that they go out right. We can't just recklessly run research on patients and just hope for the best. We need to make sure that a couple of things are properly set up before we can dive into research. And then we go through their approach. We think about, is this really the right method for the question that you want to answer? Is there anything else we could do? And we kind of get started together. After that, the product team can work independently again on the first draft of a discussion guide, for example, if it's about interviewing patients. And then we review that together, co-create, expand if it's really needed. Then we can start recruitment, prepare some artifacts. That could be prototypes. It's not necessarily prototypes. It could be also more kind of visual brochures or something like that, but anything that kind of visualizes, shows to participants what the new idea is about, so they can also give more valuable and more concrete feedback. We have a moment to check, are all the necessary trainings in place? As I said, I will come back to that later. And then it's really about conducting the research. That's the team that does it. We come together to guide kind of through the synthesis, but then again, the team within their product context, they share insights with each other. There's a couple more sides to the story, compliance and vendor contracting, not going into detail, but there are a couple of things that we need to check off. Whether we can go, there's a team that reviews us, whether we can go external with this type of research, and once we get the approval, we can really get started. Also, data protection NDA is of course really critical to make sure that we have this bulletproof. Each of those things that you saw here, each of those dots is basically a page in a documentation guide. So people can find examples of existing research plans and templates. They can find a list of vendors that they can recruit from. There's templates on compliance documents, consent forms, for example. So there's a lot of guidance in there to make teams more independent so they can take on tasks by themselves. One critical thing there is the experiment library, or the research methods library, if you like, where on each page they find information on, what is this method about? What is this technique about? How do you set it up, basically? What kind of tools can you use? What kind of compliance topics you might run into, so people get a feeling of like, okay, this is our time limit. What can we afford still, and what do we don't have time for? So really kind of guide our user, in a way, our user of research operations, to the right flow. So some challenges. Some research capabilities are easier to build than others. Some take time. So when it came to interviews or things even that don't involve patients directly, that can go pretty fast. You can set up such a framework pretty quickly. There are other methods that you would like to get into, like social media ads, landing pages that kind of describe a new idea that we're having. Those are things that are kind of more governed by regulation, and therefore take more time and more stakeholder management to get that set up. One challenge that we definitely faced in the past couple of months to build all of this was prioritization, right? There, like we said, 1,000 things to do. If you already have something in place, then you can kind of look at, where do we experience the most friction? But if you don't have so much in place, you have to build the whole thing. And it's really tricky sometimes to get going in one direction and make sure that you don't work on like 15, 20 things at the same time, and therefore you really don't work on nothing. Actually, nothing makes progress. So it's really critical to kind of keep in mind what is the most important thing that we need to do right now in order to move on. Streamlining compliance, and there, we have a bit of a nuanced view as well. Of course, we need to challenge the status quo. Of course, we need to go in and look at existing processes where they're really fit for purpose and maybe challenge some of them. And it helps, I think, to look at the goal together with other stakeholders like legal and compliance, how you could also de-risk, but in a different way. And sometimes it helps to emphasize that, well, we're actually not really doing drug research or anything that is involving chemical products. It's really just about apps and so on, and figuring out what the unmet need is related to that and so on. And that sometimes can help to kind of get the noses in the same direction. We're not exactly running clinical trials on our end. But on the other hand, I think it's also really important to have modesty, right? We need to consider goals that other teams have. All these processes were built with a reason, with a purpose, and the teams that manage those processes have goals as well. And it doesn't always help, I think, to come in strong and say, well, we need to challenge and we need to rethink this whole thing. These things were set up for a reason, and in some cases, it's just better to realize it, to document the process very transparently, provide templates and other support, and just make sure that you can run through the process efficiently rather than keep challenging everything. It's really important to build long-term relationships, I think, because you will need people to collaborate with later on, right? Your needs will change as a research and design team. You might want to come up with new methods, new capabilities. And you will occasionally really want support and feedback from departments like legal. Otherwise, you're kind of on your own deciding that this is the approach to go for. If they can give you a go that things are really bulletproof, that will really help you, give you confidence as well. So building long-term relationships in this context, I think, is really important. Pretty obvious one, but collaboration has been really key throughout, and that goes in all possible directions, starting with UX designers. So we actually also just asked feedback to them when we were working on this setup. Some people have really a lot of research expertise. Other people maybe have less experience in other contexts as well. So we literally asked, suppose that you would be on the receiving end of the support. Would you feel over-supported? Would you feel under-supported if you have to guide other teams? So we decided that initially in the first couple of months, it would be just the researchers that support product teams, but we're actually looking to open that up to the UX designers who can then support their own product teams pretty soon. Then you have all the cross-functional roles, like data scientists, engineers, agile coaches. You need them to scale the research. That's what it's all for, but you also really need them sometimes to build the research operations itself, right? The capabilities, if it involves maybe more quantitative methods or something, collaboration with cross-functional roles is absolutely critical. Leadership has been pivotal, our own UX leads, but also the higher management in the company. As I said, evidence gathering is really central to the process, and that has helped us a lot to establish the importance, right? It's not just the UX team shouting that, hey, UX is really important. It's really driven in the core of the company itself. So that has helped us a lot. There's the compliance departments, of course. They're really critical, as I said. And let's not forget them, vendors. They help us a lot with things that we can't really do very quickly internally, things like recruitment and incentives that would slow us down enormously if we didn't have their support. So your vendors are also really key in gaining that traction, that speed. It's a bit similar to what I shared before, but communicating the importance of research ops to achieve your objectives is really important, but we still need to be mindful of the comfort zone of colleagues, right? We open up, but it's not the idea that literally 100% of all cross-functional roles will now literally be in touch with patients. We have to be open that some people just don't feel that comfortable with that. Tool stack. I'm not particularly endorsing the specific tools, but I wanted to share anyway what kind of setup that we're working with. In essence, of course, we have a design tool that we create prototypes with. We use a whiteboarding tool to do basic planning, do workshops, online workshops partially. We have a standard research methods platform to do the testing, interviews, unmoderated testing. Some survey tools, and then also a analysis platform that we use for qualitative analysis of interactions with patients. And we're also going to scale that into a research repository. More about that later as well. I think what is really critical here is not the specific tools, but really that in the context of research operations that you keep them stable over time, that you don't switch like every 3 months, hey, we have yet another user testing tool, let's change everything that we're doing. So stability is really important, I think, and also to some extent that they're user-friendly. You don't want people to have to first dig into a lot of training before they can actually run an interview or an analysis. You want it to go quite smoothly, right? Formal training. Formal training is important in a way to kind of set that baseline skill a little bit higher. For example, literally this week we had a moderation training, just to give everybody in the company a little bit more feeling with what's interviewing a patient, how do you get in touch with them, what are biases that you have to take into account. Things like a confirmation bias, for example, is absolutely critical if we work in an environment where we want to look critically at our own ideas, right? Is an idea worth investing in, or isn't it that much? We don't just want to run all in parallel studies to desperately prove that we're on the right track. We just want to see what works and what doesn't work. So avoiding this type of biases is really important. And having this kind of baseline trainings to get everybody a bit up to speed helps, that you don't have to do everything on one-to-one conversations or in these early check-ins. So that just helps to scale it a bit more easily as well. We will have some other topics coming up, like compliance training, more platform trainings as well. So that's about how to use the platform to conduct an interview, how to use a platform to conduct some analysis, and so on. So in this sense, we also guide people to get a little bit better at these things. You can't just write everything up and expect that people are gonna read page after page, right? And then last but not least, communication and feedback. It's probably by now a little bit of a LinkedIn meme, but I really like the quote: "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." You have to hammer on this over time once and again, right? It's not because you present this approach once and you deliver the package and you say, okay, now we do ResearchOps, let's run with it. It doesn't really work like that. You have to keep going through this communication. And once again, we're in the midst of this. So we are doing this communication as we speak. I think you need actually a communication plan set up in advance. So what we did was we did a company-wide announcement, went to all the team meetings individually to have a conversation about this, so the first questions could pop up. And then we went into more plenary sessions where we really had open discussions with each other. But this debate is ongoing and we are learning ourselves, and that's a bit of a plot twist. Actually, the whole thing that I'm presenting is an experiment in a way. It's a test. We need to learn, we need to be modest as well to see, well, this is our hypothesis, our assumption of what could work, but maybe we'll have to change this a little bit. There are aspects that we'll have to learn from and improve over time. So we need to keep monitoring this actively, get feedback, learn ourselves as well, and see how people react to it, what is difficult, what is easy, and change on the go. So this is an overview of everything we tried so far. I hope that it can give you a recipe book a little bit as well. It will be different, of course, in your context. Not everything will be the same. You always have to look in a specific context, but at least I hope it could get you started in case you face similar needs, meaning high achieving targets and not necessarily immediately the resource or the capacity to react to it. How can you open up your discipline in such a way that you can scale this a little bit? So what's next? I always like to say nothing, because we need to do this properly. We are launching this framework, we built it, but now is the time to actually start doing it. Get product team requests for support, actually guide them through this whole process. We shouldn't immediately rush into 25 other priorities. We need to be there, we need to be available and respect this commitment, and really support teams and do that for a couple of months, I would say. But of course, we are thinking about the next thing. I already mentioned more advanced methods like social media, like landing pages and so on, and use that as a basis for recruiting later studies. But we also will develop a research repository. So all these recordings, transcripts that we will store, they are meant to stay there for a while. And this means that typically we have returning target audiences like diabetes patients, for example. It's not the idea that actually every time we do research, we do the same research over and over. Ideally, we would have a repository to go back to and check maybe already the first few assumptions. We don't need to do research because we already gathered data a while ago. Of course, you can't keep that forever, both for data protection reasons, but also, target audiences change over time, technology changes. So you have to refresh that, but at least you don't always have to run the same research again. So that's how we did it. That's how we scaled patient centricity and digital healthcare innovation. This is our answer to the question, what is democratization? Or at least for now, we hope to achieve our targets or at least come closer to them. But I think also, if you think about it, this type of setup, I believe, could also really be relevant in other contexts. Like if you want to do more early stage work, if you want to have, more cross-functional roles, have really better insight, better feeling of what the target audience is. If you want to streamline the logistics of research, and if you have a certain capacity, it's limited always. Let's use the time as much as we can to get our target audience better and their needs so we can react to them, and let's minimize the time that we have to spend in the logistics aspects of it, of course. So going into the Q&A, I'm really happy to answer your questions, but also want to drop this question in the audience. Like I said, if you have ambitious needs in the company, in your context, what would be ways how you can democratize that? What can other roles take over or take part in, at least? Really curious to hear how you think about it, and always open, of course, later on also to interact in the corridors. But in the meantime, thank you for listening from UX researchers and designers supporting people who do research.
And I just had a question about at what stage in the process might efficacy of the solutions that are coming up be tested. So for example, you're getting patient feedback on their needs and priorities, but when the product evolves at a certain point, you'd want to look back and see whether it has any clinical efficacy, or if it's, so for example, your product in China, does that actually require a controlled study against a group of people that don't get access to that solution, and then back on it and seeing whether that group did better than the other group? I know you're focused on early stage. I just wanted to understand where that fits into the overall picture.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Interesting point. We come close to it. So it is the case that it's in essence not really our priority. So the idea is really that we explore the unmet needs. Do we answer the pain points? Is there desirability, viability, and feasibility in place to a certain extent? And after a little bit less than a year, the idea is really that we hand it over to the larger business, IT, for example. They pick up the idea, and together with then clinical operations, then the idea is to figure really out, is there like a quantitative efficacy to it? So it's not going to be generally our responsibility to do that kind of work, because it requires a lot of different expertise, actually. Putting a clinical trial out there has just a wealth of other challenges when it comes to healthcare compliance, and it's just really a different expertise. So it's the same company in a way, but yeah, not the same people who have that expertise.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. It's always insightful to see how organizations are doing this. And I was wondering, are you also experimenting around scaling this way of working in the organization? So you showed a couple of materials or guides for people to use. Are you also experimenting with that?
To bring it to the larger organization?
Yeah. So experimenting with the best way to integrate this way of working in the organization.
Yeah. We are planning indeed very soon to open up this space to the broader pharmaceutical organizations, to have that documentation available and so on to the bigger company. We are in touch with the UX people over there. It's not going to match one-to-one though. So given that we have that specific focus for early experimentation, generally their focus will be more about, okay, now that we take that idea from which we have more confidence that it actually works, that it's meaningful, let's start building that now. Then you have UX people there who will take care more of like the user interface, go out to user test that to see whether the product is developing properly. So we know that part of the things that we've set up will be relevant for that, but not everything. So we really have to work together with them closely to see. We can't just port it there and put it out for them and say, okay, this is now relevant in entirety also for you. We have to really look at what methods are more prone in later stages of the product development rather than the type of things that we are using. So for example, quantitative methods, they're not extremely relevant in the very earliest stages. We're not going to user test a very early prototype, which is just a really basic idea with 60 people, for example, just a very limited group. So you can't really create the same process and documentation, I think, or not exactly the same for teams that are really doing something else in a later product development stage.
Thanks for the presentation. This will come to my challenges to deal with. I get a question about the business case, because usually this is the hardest part of the process, to convince the organization the idea. How do you deal with that?
You captured that very well. I should have put it up in the challenges. So that is actually something that we are continuously facing. It's not a solved problem at all. It helps to get them on board as early as possible in any case. So don't wait until you're at the end of the pilot stage to start talking to business. It helps to get them into like presentations. We have regular presentations where we showcase certain ideas. It helps if they attend and kind of catch that early vibe and see, I support this idea. But for sure, it is an ongoing challenge, because exactly the ambition is that we work on what you call Horizon 3 ideas, right? The idea is really that we look far ahead of what the business is currently doing, which makes it then challenging to find stakeholders that can get on board, because we're exactly so far ahead of what is currently happening. So yeah, and it's our responsibility in a way to not find business support right away, because it means that we're working on the right thing. But it's a problem to solve. It's a challenge to solve for sure.
I might have an answer for this. In doing these organizations as well, so we've been starting a lot with business cases. So with business cases and finding money for good ideas. Basically, what you have to do is making sure you have involvement up front. So you go with C-level management or like executives or business units. You tell them, okay, what's the current situation? What's our current business model? How do we make money right now? What's happening around us? What are trends? Things are evolving. And how does it affect our business model? And what does it mean that we have to invest in to make sure that we make money also in the future? And then you end up with innovation teams or investment teams that you say, okay, well, we need to invest in this in order to make sure that we make money in the future. And then you can even go that far that you have C-level or executives write it off. You say like put their autograph, their commitment to it, and then you say, okay, then we start looking for ideas in these innovation teams. Then you feed this into your funnel with moonshot campaigns, with open innovation, finding startups. So you have the money already up front. There needs to be a budget for this, and you can even link it to the bonus structure of these. Because otherwise, you'll never get there. This is
it's definitely something that needs to happen earlier. High-level business support alignment. Sometimes you want to keep independence though as well, because there are some ideas that could get rejected in a very early stage because they're so far ahead of what the business is currently doing that if you involve people too early, you could get resistance, and you actually kind of want to develop the idea further. First, show that it has desirability, viability, so that then you actually have more hands-on data to show that it actually works, and then you increase maybe the adoption in the long run, right? So it's a difficult, yeah, it's somewhere in the middle, I think.
My remark was, if you need a high-level buy-in, then you need their incentives to be focused, aligned with your incentives as well. That's, as long as you don't get there, it's always down to personal involvement. They like the idea or something. Money.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yes, for sure. Yeah.
It's kind of a similar question, but not about getting buy-in from the business, but about getting buy-in from the people you want to help do research. So you mentioned this story about this developer, but you also said how you get to be sensible about people's preferences. Doing research is not really like this kind of thing. But if you get then to do this, then all of these resources are being used. So I'm curious about like specific ways in which you onboarded different people, developers, customer support, or other areas to do this. Like if you just happen to have people who wanted to volunteer, you have to go and find them.
Yeah, thanks. In a way, I think everything that I've showed is trying to answer that, because it takes care of questions such as, yeah, okay, we need to do this now, but how are we supported? So you have that kind of, not process, but a bit of a framework that takes them through it. you have these trainings, so you take away concerns of, yeah, but I'm actually not skilled. You have this documentation, so you don't always have to be there one-to-one. They can independently learn whenever they feel like, and so on. So in a way, the whole research operations framework is trying to take care of potential concerns. And other than that, it's really kind of on-the-ground communication, listen to concerns, trying to reframe that a little bit. But also, yeah, business support, management support, because in the end, we're just working on a tool, a device to get to where the goals need to be, or like, you know, we have this thing that is really just a device or a tool to achieve goals that were set by management. So there's also a point, I think, where you just need to have the leadership support that say, well, this is just how the company develops now. This is how we're going to work, and not necessarily everybody needs to do every single task within it. We can take into account personal preferences, but on the whole, this is how we work as a company.
Yeah, I hear you saying it is kind of brand new. So how long ago did you start this, and have you already seen some changes in mindset?
Yeah, not so much in terms of the product teams yet, because literally we are this communication that's exactly but we started earlier with this, of course. In the first wave, which is actually about a year ago, we kind of did something similar, but for ourselves. Because even as a UX chapter, we were doing this type of experiments, and we actually decided to make it more repeatable and reusable for ourselves. So part of the work was actually done even like a year ago, but just kind of within the UX chapter. And then goals changed, the approach of the company changed, and then we were, okay, actually, research operations can also be an answer to that. And then we took it in this direction. So it's a long time in the making. It's a lot of work, and let's see where we get it.
One more, that's okay. So you, I suppose working in this field, you've got a large degree of IP protection that needs to occur. You also spoke about democratization and scale up and the challenge between those two. In the past, we've sort of, at the MVP stage, been able to sort of outsource UX people who get given the prototype and are able to sort of navigate through the pain points from a usability perspective. Obviously, there's a trade-off there of letting the cat out the bag. Do you envisage using those sorts of solutions to be able to scale the discovery or the MVP phase quicker by just putting it out on the open source internet?
So do you mean a higher, just to understand it well, higher external capacity to take part of the tasks?
Say on a project basis, so not even employees or contractors, but hey, we need to test this, who's actively on this testing portal that wants to get paid, I don't know, X to do it in 3 hours or 5 hours.
To some extent, it already happens. There are occasionally projects that, like, on the whole, pretty much are done by external companies. It's a case-by-case thing.
1,000 people, right? It might be a viable way.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a nice suggestion. We focused mostly now on the really early stages, so it's more qualitative research. It's more small-scale feedback and so on. As we move to more MVP and pilots, and especially pilots, we're going to look into, but it's a bit of a next step to look into methods that are reaching a larger audience, and there we're probably going to be in the realm of a landing page with a call to action where people can subscribe to something like a mailing list and then recruit off of that and then kind of automatize that kind of thing.
Then you can sort of find the right demographic. Say we only want females between 20 and 35.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we hold off on a question. And we just give a round of applause to Bert and say thank you so much.